After failing my college entrance exam, I married Gary and supported him for 40 years. But when he died, I wasn't allowed at his funeral, and half the property went to our kids, the other half to his lover, Nina. All he left for me was a single sentence. For the admission letter he took, I paid for it with my 40 years. Turns out, I hadn't failed the exam. He took my admission letter to impress Nina. I caused a scene at the funeral, exposing 4 decades of unfairness, only to be scorned by my children. Gary and Nina are meant to be, you're the one who interfered. If you keep causing trouble, don't blame us if we leave you to fend for yourself in the countryside. I was so angry I died, and then I opened my eyes, back to the year of my college entrance exam. The admission letter was still on its way, and my life was just beginning. Wendy, we're about to get married, and you're still acting up. His familiar scolding snapped me back to clarity, like a cold splash of water. I was back 40 years. I hadn't married Gary yet, nor had he stolen my admission letter. I still had time. Gary kept running his mouth. It's just a bowl of meat. Are you going to die if you don't eat it? I've told you Nina is like a sister. Why do you think so poorly of us? If you keep this up, maybe we shouldn't get married at all. Holding back my excitement, I replied coldly. Then we shouldn't get married. That simple sentence left Gary stunned. Wendy, what are you saying? I said, we shouldn't get married. I snatched the meat from Gary's hand, suppressing my anger. A loser who gives his fiancée's food to someone else. I don't want to marry you. Seeing me ready to leave, Gary furiously grabbed my arm. Wendy, what do you mean? If you won't marry me, then who will you marry? You're so dumb. You think you're Nina and can get into college? I advise you to know your place or I won't marry you even if you beg. Smack. I slapped Gary hard, glaring at him. Gary, let me tell you, Wendy, don't want a man who's tangled up with someone else. Before Gary could react, I stormed off with the bowl of meat. The sting in my hand kept reminding me, this was all real. I really had a second chance. In my previous life, my grandpa remembered how Gary's grandpa saved his life and made a dying wish that my parents accepted. If I didn't get into college, I'd marry Gary. I remembered my parents' hopes and studied hard, only to be told I failed the entrance exam. Heartbroken, I married Gary in a daze. For 40 years, I looked after his sick mom, supported his siblings, and took care of all household matters. I thought my efforts were worthwhile. Until Gary passed and I wasn't allowed at the funeral, and his estate went to our kids and the woman he was tangled with for half his life. He claimed marrying me was out of guilt for taking my admission letter. Even on his deathbed, he said he owed me nothing. I should have gone to college and had my career, a whole new life. But he ruined it, leaving me sick from years of hard work. Thinking of all this, I could just about grind Gary to dust with my teeth. I hurried to the village post station to check if the admission letter had arrived. The clerk waved me off, fanning himself. Why is everyone asking me the same thing? It's such a big deal, if it were here, I'd let you know. Wendy, just wait. Everyone asking? I sensed something was off and quickly asked. Who else asked besides me? Ken shot me a curious look, teasing. Who else? Just Gary and Nina. Didn't Nina sit for the exam the same year as you? Gary probably has you on his mind. He said if you get in, he'll wait for you for a while, if not, he'll get married with you right away. Wendy, he's really into you. He's a good guy. My fingers clenched tight. Gary put on a good show for others, everyone thought he was devoted to me. So no one suspected Gary had taken my letter for Nina. With this realization, I lowered my head, eyes filling with tears. Sir, can I ask a favor? Don't let Gary take my things anymore. You don't know, today he tried to take the meat Mom made for me, saying Nina needed it more. Called me a hillbilly, wasting fine food. The clerk slammed his fan on the table, glaring. What? What nonsense is Gary spouting? What's wrong with the countryside? Working folk are the best. It's your meat, why should it go to someone else? No, I'm going to have a word with his mom. I quickly held him back, putting on a pitiful face. That's not necessary. Gary's mom is frail, what if she gets sick from being upset? If he's bold enough to take what's mine, who knows what else he's given away secretly. So I hoped you'd keep an eye out for me. If anything is addressed to me, don't give it to anyone but me. Oh, and the meat is for your trouble. He hesitated but eventually took it after I insisted. With this sorted, I headed home with the empty bowl. As soon as I got back, Mom and Dad looked at my empty hands in surprise. Wendy, did you finish it already? I put the bowl down, shaking my head. No, I gave it to the mail clerk. Mom was about to speak when an angry voice cut through. Wendy. What's your deal? Why give the meat to him? I turned around, unimpressed. Why, do I need your permission now to use what's mine? Mom pulled at my arm, agreeing with Gary. Wasn't that meat meant for you to eat with Gary? Why? I clenched my fist silently, then smiled slyly. Gary, why don't you tell the whole story? You're taking my meat to give to Nina. You said country folks like us would waste it and Nina needs it for her health. Why should our stuff be used for you to curry favor with someone else? Gary panicked and immediately denied it. What are you talking about? I swear, whoever is lying will be struck by lightning. I quickly retorted, stepping closer. So, you talk big in front of me but wouldn't dare in front of the elders. Gary, it's true your grandpa saved mine. But over the years, haven't we helped you enough? We've given money and food. My dad even injured his hand helping your dad out. Isn't the debt repaid by now? Are you planning to leech off us for the next 18 generations? My words made my parents' faces darken immediately. Originally, this marriage was something Grandpa forced my parents to agree to on his deathbed. They knew Grandpa was using me to keep supporting Gary's family. But since Gary seemed decent and with Grandpa putting his foot down, they agreed. But if it meant I had to support someone else's love affair, they wouldn't be on board no matter what. Seeing my parents' expressions, Gary quickly blurted out. Wendy, what nonsense are you spouting? There's nothing between me and Nina. But if you fail the exam, you'll have no choice but to marry me. Defeated, he stormed off. Hearing Gary curse like that, Dad didn't look pleased. Wendy, if you really don't want to marry, I'll protect you with my life. Mom held back tears, embracing me. My sweet girl, how did this happen to you? Feeling the warmth of my mother's embrace made my heart ache even more. Despite their words, our village values filial piety above all. Grandpa's gone, but Grandma is still here. And she always adheres strictly to Grandpa's words. If I really refuse to marry and she threatens drastic measures, that wouldn't be surprising. Villagers gossiping would ruin my parents. How could I let that happen? I wiped away my tears, comforting them. It's okay, Mom and Dad. As long as I get into college, nobody here will have anything to say. Mom was taken aback, then realized. So you're giving meat to the guy at the post to prevent Gary from messing with your results? For something this big. Such a serious matter probably wouldn't stop him. Dad stood up, patting my head. Wendy, leave this to me. I trust you'll get into college. And I'll make sure no one steals what's rightfully yours. I nodded firmly. For the next few days, my parents and I took turns going to the post to keep watch, wary of Gary seizing a chance. Meanwhile, things weren't going smoothly for Gary and Nina either. Nina was an educated city girl. As soon as she got to the countryside, she hooked up with Gary. Since Gary couldn't do demanding chores due to gender propriety, he'd often have me help out. Before, I genuinely believed Gary. I thought he wanted Nina to teach his younger siblings, so I'd work tirelessly. Now that I see things clearly, I'm not doing those chores anymore. Without me, Nina whined about being tired after just a few days. And Gary had to grit his teeth and help. Rumors started spreading. Gary was just visiting family and would soon return to the army. Thinking it through, he approached me. "Wendy, I know I was out of line before. But there's truly nothing between Nina and me. She's leaving as soon as she gets into college. What do you think could happen with us? I just wanted her to help teach some folks. You're going to be their sister-in-law soon, can't you just give a little?" I impatiently pushed him away, saying firmly, "I'm not marrying you no matter what." Infuriated by my shove, Gary barked. "A rough woman like you could never get into college. Just wait and see." Ignoring him, I hurried to the tree. Seeing that familiar figure there finally allowed me to breathe a sigh of relief. Luckily, I made it in time. In a past life, I was doing chores when I saved a man who had passed out here. I thought it was just a small favor. So when he asked my name, I told him, then forgot about it. It wasn't until later I learned his name was Ken, and he was a significant figure in the military. When Gary found out I saved him, he used it to climb ranks and ultimately became a commander. But in my past life, he constantly belittled me, boasting about other wives' impressive backgrounds, all while hiding this favor I did him. This time, I wouldn't let Gary benefit from that. With that thought, I helped him as I did in the past. Ken eventually woke up. "Young lady, thank you for saving me. Can I know your name?" Surprised briefly, I then smiled. "Wendy." It was nothing. I should get back to work now. Before he could ask more, I waved him off and left quickly. I never intended to use Ken for anything. I'd heard of his reputation as a principled soldier. A good man like him shouldn't die here. I just wanted to make sure Gary couldn't exploit this favor. Clearing this hurdle, I felt a weight lift off me. In the following days, Gary curiously stayed out of trouble, and Nina no longer flaunted Gary's affection toward her. Yet as days passed, there was still no sign of any college acceptance letter. Finally, the uncle at the post couldn't help but wonder. "Wendy, maybe you just didn't make it?" I knew that couldn't be true, so I quickly asked, "Do you know if Nina made it in?" He shook his head, saying, "I haven't heard about that. But someone saw Nina packing her things. They say even though she didn't get in, her family took her back." Hearing this, I sensed something wasn't right. In my past life, Gary used my college acceptance letter for Nina. Her family wouldn't take her back unless she got into college herself. How could things have changed now? Suddenly, a thought hit me. I asked eagerly, "Mister, the mailman just left, right?" He nodded, and I didn't bother saying another word. I rushed to the village entrance and finally stopped the mailman who was about to leave. "Hey there, is there a package for Wendy?" The mailman thought for a moment and asked in confusion, "Wasn't it already picked up?" Someone claiming to be Wendy's husband took it. I even asked folks from your big river village, and they all said he was. In an instant, my anger boiled over. For a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Memories from my past life weighed on my mind, fueling my rage. I hurriedly made my way to Gary's house. I encountered several villagers along the way, but I couldn't stop to greet them. I barged into Gary's house and saw him being all cozy with Nina. Without thinking, I slapped Gary hard. "Gary, where's my acceptance letter?" Gary's face turned red from the slap. The villagers who noticed something was off looked on in shock. "Wendy, what are you babbling about?" Gary tried to maintain his composure in front of everyone. "What acceptance letter? Sounds like you're just going crazy after failing your exams." Seeing Gary's shameless face, I shouted in anger, "You're the crazy one. I told you Uncle Wang couldn't get my letter, and you took it from the mailman. And you have the nerve to tell everyone you're my husband? Gross. We're not even married, and you're claiming to be my spouse. Have you no shame?" With my accusations, some people in the crowd started speaking up. Come to think of it, Gary did pick up something for Wendy from the mailman. But wasn't it supposed to be given to Wendy? Maybe it wasn't. Seeing the suspicion in the crowd, Nina quickly handed over an envelope. Here it is. I must have just been too busy and forgot to give it to you. I snatched it, but inside was only a blank sheet of paper. Gary sneered, you think there's a reason I didn't hand it over? It's just a blank piece of paper, nothing special. You switched it. I glared at Gary, clenching the paper in frustration. At that moment, Susan and Betty rushed over, pushing me aside. Nonsense. It's just a piece of paper. Do you have any proof that my brother took your acceptance letter? The villagers nodded in agreement, trying to calm me. Right, those kids, Susan and Betty, are the honest ones around here. Wendy, this is probably just a misunderstanding. Even my parents, who had arrived, looked uncertain and advised me to leave. Gary, witnessing this, grew smug, mocking me. Wendy, why are you so desperate to not marry me? Trying to leave and become a golden phoenix? You're just a sparrow, can't be a phoenix. You'd be better off letting me propose and marrying me. I think you're the one who should confess, a stern voice interrupted, drawing everyone's attention. We turned to see a middle-aged man with an authoritative presence approaching. Wendy, long time no see. I was stunned to see Ken, not expecting him to show up here. Gary, thinking he had caught me, shouted, Oh. Wendy, is this why you don't want to marry me? Because you got yourself a sugar daddy? The villagers started whispering, who is this dude? Could it be? Did she dump him for this older guy? I was about to hit Gary when he caught my hand. What's wrong, did I hit a nerve? Wendy, don't forget, your grandpa owes my grandpa. This engagement was set ages ago. There's no backing out. And as for that acceptance letter, you're dreaming. Let's see if that guy can make one appear for you. But then another voice boomed, enough. Gary, do you know who that is? Gary's face turned white. Commander, what are you doing here? Billy, clearly disgusted, replied, shouldn't I be the one asking what you've done? This is Chief Ken. Wendy saved him, and he came to thank her. But the way you spoke out of turn in front of him, you've disgraced our entire company. Gary turned pale, staring at Ken, filled with dread. Chief Ken, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was you. Before Gary could continue, Ken coldly motioned for silence, then turned to me warmly. Wendy, are you sure he took your acceptance letter? I nodded confidently. Yes, it was him. And given how he's been tangled up with Nina, I have every reason to believe he handed it to her. At this, Nina panicked. Wendy, what nonsense are you spouting? I earned my acceptance letter fair and square. What right do you have to accuse me just because Chief Ken's here? Nina. Gary tried to hush her, don't be ridiculous. Chief Ken isn't someone who would let that happen. He looked at me with pleading eyes. Wendy, Nina's not lying. The letter is hers. I know you don't want to marry me, but there's no need to lie. Stop blaming me, Gary, I remained unfazed and replied coldly. If it's not mine, then she should show the letter and verify the name. Or are you too guilty to do that? The villagers nodded, whispering, that's right. Whose is it anyway? Why not just match the name to figure it out? I heard from the older guy at the post station, Gary often sneaks things from Wendy to curry favor with Nina. But trying to charm her is one thing, outright grabbing someone's acceptance letter from the mailman is totally different. Seems to me, he's kind of suspicious. At first, everyone thought I was just losing it over not getting accepted. But seeing Gary and Nina acting all shady raised suspicions. Billy even pushed for it. Gary, the lady's right. Why don't you just show us the name? With everyone pressing, Nina stiffened her neck and said, the acceptance letter's not with me. I gave her a stern look and immediately asked. What do you mean? How come it's not with you? Nina's eyes darted around and she said. This isn't even my house, why would I put my acceptance letter here? Of course, I sent it to my home address. My parents wrote to me saying I got in. What, do you want me to take you to my house to prove it? If you don't believe me, you're welcome to search my room. See if you can find the acceptance letter. Seeing Gary and Nina so smug, it hit me that they're well prepared. Ken Sir, being in the military, wouldn't search a woman's room without evidence. Even if they searched, it's probably hidden well by now. Ken Sir, who had been quiet, darkened his expression. Gary, do you think being accepted is just about a piece of paper? I froze for a moment, then couldn't help but look excitedly at Ken Sir, eagerly asking. Ken Sir, do you have a way? Ken Sir stepped aside, revealing the person behind him. The principal. I was pleasantly surprised to see him and a bit flustered. Weren't you heading back to the city? Why are you here? The principal affectionately patted my head and said with a smile. I was going back. But Ken Sir found me and asked about you, so I came along. Then he turned and sternly addressed Nina. Nina, do I need to spell it out? Wendy's the one who got into college, not you. The school has records. Are you planning to impersonate Wendy to attend? Upon hearing this, Gary's face went pale. He never imagined I'd save Ken Sir, let alone witnessing this. Their lies, too, were completely exposed by the witnesses. Nina was flustered. Gone was her arrogance, and she clutched the principal's hand shakily. Principal, that letter is mine. If it isn't, I can't go back. I don't want to stay in this rural area. Please, give me this chance. The principal pulled her hand away, his voice cold. That's no excuse for taking Wendy's letter. Return it now. Ken Sir looked at Gary, not amused. It's clear as day, Gary, you still planning to cover for her? Your promotion in the military. Hearing this got Gary anxious. He did well in the service, gaining Billy's favor. He wouldn't ruin his future for Nina. Nina, the acceptance letter. Give it back to Wendy. We can always take exams next year. Gary urgently nudged Nina, pressing her to hand it back. Nina looked incredulous, pushing Gary away. Gary, easy for you to say. Will you be giving me money? You're on bad terms with Wendy, and your family's short of cash. Where'd money for my studies come from? Money's got a way of working itself out. Gary was frantic, throwing Nina a threatening look. You're choosing now to throw a tantrum? Nina, spoiled by Gary's affection, got angry at the threat. She stubbornly undid a button, pulling out the acceptance letter from her clothes. I rushed forward, trying to snatch it back, but Nina tore it to shreds before I could reach her. The pieces fluttered to the ground, and I couldn't help but slap Nina. Nina, you lost your mind? Nobody expected she'd hide the letter on herself. In such a time valuing purity, no one dared search her person. Clutching the side of her face I slapped, Nina's eyes filled with hatred. I'm crazy. What I can't have, no one else will. Wendy, dreaming of college? Keep dreaming. Looking at the shredded letter on the ground, my heart ached as if bleeding. Mom came over, supporting me tenderly. Just as I bent to gather the pieces, the principal stopped me. Wendy, don't worry. Ken Sir already sorted it out for you. I looked at Ken Sir confused, who nodded and said. When I heard you didn't get your acceptance letter, I had a new one sent from NYU. I made sure it would get to you in person. Wendy, you earned this. This is your spot. My eyes welled up, and I bowed repeatedly to Ken Sir, thanking him. Ken Sir, thank you. My parents were overjoyed, thanking Ken Sir and the others. The village folks relaxed, congratulating me one after another. How wonderful that Wendy gets to study. Our village has a scholar now. That's right, who said no stars come from our village? Wendy's our star. Unlike the joyful atmosphere, Gary and Nina looked utterly defeated. In the mess, they not only failed to take my spot but ruined their reputations and futures. Everyone chose to ignore them. My parents insisted on inviting Ken Sir and his group for a meal at our home. Unable to refuse my parents' good intentions, they agreed. The group soon left, leaving behind Gary and his grim cohorts. Back home, my parents bought some meat, pulled out their cherished wine, insistent on sharing drinks with Ken Sir and the others. After a hearty meal, Dad looked at me and said, "So, my daughter finally made it through. Ken, you don't know, since she was little, she's been saying she wants to do something big, contribute to the country. She could have been taking exams year after year, I could support that. But no, the marriage agreement, that gave her just one shot." Dad wiped his tears as he spoke. I looked at him helplessly, trying to comfort him. "Dad, why are you bringing all this up? I got in, and I don't have to marry Gary. Good times are ahead." Ken patted Dad on the shoulder, looking at me approvingly. "Wendy's right. Success comes from hard work. I'm sure Wendy will achieve great things in the future. I know some people at NYU who can look out for her. No worries." With Ken's reassurance, my parents finally relaxed. After dinner, Ken gave me his number, telling me to reach out if I needed anything. After they left, my parents started preparing all the stuff I'd need for college. Gary, not ready to let go, came to see me again. "Wendy, let's get married after you finish college." But now that I had my acceptance letter, I had zero patience left for Gary. "Gary, how can you be so shameless? You said if I got into college, the engagement would be off. You laughed at me, thinking I wouldn't get in. Guess what? I don't want you." After that, I ignored him completely. He even tried to get my grandma to force the marriage using my grandpa's final wishes. But once Grandma heard what he'd done, she chased him off with a broom. "You little brat, stealing my granddaughter's acceptance letter, and you have the nerve to talk marriage. Get lost." Gary's family's reputation was ruined in our village. Anytime one of them went out, people couldn't help but point and gossip. Gary's mom, already in poor health, got worse from the stress. Susan and Betty, once adored for their cuteness, found themselves with a new nickname, liars. Now everyone knew the truth, even the village kids gave them a hard time. Gary's family used to get help from mine, which let Gary save money to send to his sister, Nina. But now, my parents wouldn't lift a finger to help them anymore. Gary's mom needed medication, and Susan and Betty needed money for clothes and school. Gary was on his own. He wanted Nina to chip in, but she refused every time. They argued so much they almost went to the village head for mediation. Mom filled me in on the drama. She was angry about everything Gary's family had done, secretly feeling satisfied that they were having a tough time. I hugged her, trying to calm her down. "Mom, never mind them. Our future's bright." I thought that was the end of it, but some people just wouldn't let things go. One day as I was heading home, I felt suddenly weak and overheated. Grabbing a tree for support, I looked up and saw Gary in front of me. "It was you." In that moment, I realized he drugged me. "Gary, you're a lowlife, using such dirty tricks." He looked at me with bitterness. "Wendy, this is your fault for being so disobedient. Why couldn't you just marry me? Why did you have to go to that university and embarrass me in front of Ken? I was supposed to get a promotion." I struggled to stand, gasping, "Gary, don't pretend I don't know your game. You just wanted my parents to keep helping your broke family. How much of your own paycheck do you even use for your family?" Gary sneered, "So what? Blame your grandfather for saying you didn't have to marry me if you got into college. You owe our family, you know. Your whole family should be grateful." I tried to run, but Nina appeared out of nowhere and pushed me down. "Stop wasting time talking," she snapped at Gary. "Move it." Seeing her, I said, "Nina, why are you helping Gary? If you hurt me, do you think I'll let things go for you?" Nina smirked ominously. "Wendy, just get married here and stay." Gripping the grass, I faced Gary. "Do you dare? I'll tell Ken everything. Good luck staying in the army." Bending down, Nina patted my face. "Wendy, you think we didn't plan for that? Gary drank the drug too. We'll just say it's an accident, kids messing around, accidentally drinking spiked water. Who'll believe you? And you, caught with a man in public, will be punished if you don't marry. I felt like I was burning from the inside, my very blood was boiling. Determined to stay conscious, I bit down hard on my lip, using the pain to keep myself alert. Gary was starting to lose control too, his eyes full of raw desire. Nina crouched and watched smugly. Wendy, no one's coming to save you. I made sure of it. Even if you tear up your lips or scream your throat raw, no one will help you. Wendy, you're stuck here forever. That's your destiny. Nina's crazy laughter echoed in my ears. It reminded me of Nina at Gary's funeral in my past life. She was just like that. She's the same age as me, but she looks 20 years younger. She's all elegance and grace, while I was losing my mind. We're worlds apart. I remember clearly how she came up to me, gloating. Wendy, married to Gary for 40 years, so what? He only married you to have a maid, to take care of his parents, raise a sister and brother, handle the house inside and out. He said you and I are different. You're born to serve, not like me, who should live pampered. Honestly, I should thank you for letting me and Gary enjoy life all these years. I was shaking with rage, tried to slap her, but my kids pushed me to the ground. Gary and Nina were always meant for each other. Mom, look at yourself, I'm embarrassed even saying you're my mother. Dad's funeral, his assets, his business, not yours to meddle with. Dad wasn't wrong, spoiled you too much with an easy life. They took the side of the ones who ruined me, their words piercing the softest part of my heart. I was so mad, I died. But even at death, I heard them gripe about my death being inconvenient. This time around, I did so much, no way I'm settling for my past fate. I glanced at Gary heading my way, out of it. My eyes fixed on the stone near Nina. Some unknown energy surged within me. Just before Gary got hold of me, I picked up the stone and swung it at Nina's head. Nina crumbled, and with sheer will, I got up. Gary pounced on Nina, tearing at her clothes. Nina was out of it from the hit, then scrambled to defend her clothes. Gary. Can't you see? I'm not Wendy. Let go. She tried waking Gary's sense, but they overdid it with the fake act and the drugs. Gary had lost all reason. He'd been in the military, easy for him to overpower Nina. Nina panicked, crying for Gary to spare her, even begged me. Wendy, help me. I was wrong, please, please save me. I tossed the stone aside, saw a hint of relief on Nina's face. She crawled towards the stone, aiming to knock out Gary like I did. But before she could grab it, Gary yanked her back, ripping her shirt. I turned away, ignoring the screams and curses, walking away step by step. Dodging the crowd, I went home and submerged myself in a water barrel. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was Mom dropping her tools, rushing toward me. Don't call anyone. That was the last thing I said before passing out completely. When I came to, my parents were there, looking worried sick. Wendy, thank goodness you're awake. You're okay now. Mom was so scared, she could finally breathe easy. I tried to smile, feeling guilty. Dad, Mom. I'm sorry for making you worry. Mom shook her head, stroking my hair. It's Gary and Nina again, right? Before I could ask, Dad spoke up. Gary and Nina got caught fooling around in the woods. Couldn't even separate them. Wasn't that near your work site? I nodded, told my parents everything that happened. After hearing my story, Mom hugged me tight, hurting for me. Those two animals, won't they leave our Wendy alone? Dad looked at me, concerned. Wendy, they'll try pinning this on you. Maybe stay with your grandma for a bit. We'll handle things here. I shook my head, spoke up. No point hiding. If I go, they'll say it was me. Right when I said that, noise erupted outside. Wendy. Get out here. I got dressed, stood with my parents at the door. There was Gary's rare-seen mother, and Gary and Nina beside her, blocking the door, with villagers gathering around. "Wendy, you little witch." Seeing me, Gary's mother snarled. "How dare you scheme against my son?" Mom, already fuming, stormed up and pinned Gary's mom, smacking her twice, pulling her hair. "Who you calling names? Your son gets in trouble, and it's my girl's fault? Say it again, and I'll rip your mouth apart." Gary tried stepping in, but Dad blocked him. Gary's mom was frail, and Gary still drugged, couldn't outfight my parents. Villagers pulled them apart, trying to calm things. "Let's talk it out, no need for a scene." Gary glared at me, spoke up. "Wendy, you drugged me and Nina." "Proof?" I calmly eyed Gary, scoffing. "Jack, you tell them, did Wendy have you bring water?" Gary shoved the neighbor kid Jack forward, pointing at me. Jack glanced at me timidly, then nodded. "Yeah, it was her. She had me bring water for Gary and Nina." Murmuring broke out immediately, eyes casting blame. I sneered, locking eyes with Jack. "Jack, you say I drugged them. Then tell me, where and what did I give you?" Jack stuck out his neck, answered right away. "By the hillside in the back. You gave me candy, said it was just to quench Gary and Nina's thirst. I didn't know it was harmful." I stared at Jack, questioning further. "What candy? Show it." Gary rushed to say. "That candy's long gone." "Wendy, still denying it?" I clamped Jack's shoulder, face turning serious. "Jack, when you eat candy, you probably keep the wrapper, right? You mentioned the place but not the time. Was it last night at dinner or the day before at lunch? Remember, kids who lie get eaten by monsters." I made a funny face, and Jack immediately started crying and threw the candy wrapper. "This is it. It was last night's dinner." I let go of the scared, crying Jack and picked up the wrapper from the ground. "I remember, Gary, you brought this candy back, right?" Back then, Susan and Betty were showing it off in the village, saying they only gave it to Nina and them. Didn't give anyone else a piece. Also, I was helping a neighbor move stuff during dinner yesterday. "Gary, are you trying to blame your dirty deeds on me?" Jack's mom saw the situation and angrily questioned. "Jack, tell the truth. Who really told you to do this?" Jack shivered in fear and said quietly. "It was Gary. He told me to give it to Wendy. But I really didn't know there was something in the water. Gary said I was hurting people and that if I didn't help him, he'd call the cops on me." Now, the truth was out. Jack's mom rushed at Gary and Nina, yelling. "You two shameless people. Daring to involve our Jack in this mess. Did you really think I'd let this slide?" Gary's mom tried to stop her, but unexpectedly, Jack's mom scratched her face. In the end, Gary's family completely lost face. Nina's reputation was ruined, and she had to marry Gary. I heard Nina's parents wanted her to marry for a dowry, but Nina refused, insisting she wanted to go to college. Now they found out she didn't get into college and ended up with Gary, and they're so mad they cut ties. Gary didn't want responsibility. Nina used the threat of reporting him to force him into marriage. Their wedding day was a mess. Gary's mom tried to give Nina a hard time, but Nina wasn't one to back down, and they argued in public. But these, I didn't see with my own eyes. On the day of their wedding, my parents sent me off to college. Finally, at the college I dreamt of for lifetimes, I cherished every moment there. I studied like crazy, never missing a chance to better myself. Later, during the opening up policies, I got into business and quickly made my first fortune. As my business grew, I bought a house in the city to bring my family over. Grandma didn't want to leave the village, so I could only bring my parents to the city. When I went back to the village 10 years later for Grandma's funeral, I heard about Gary's situation. Gary's mom was sick, and Nina did all the housework. Nina was spoiled and refused to do anything when pregnant, making Susan and Betty do it. While carrying a pot of boiling water, they dropped it. Susan's hand got broken, and Betty ended up with a scarred face. Gary, furious, argued with Nina, even hitting her. Nina had enough of Gary's mother's passive aggressiveness and sent a complaint letter in a rage, getting Gary fired. Gary had high ambitions but couldn't find a good job, constantly fighting with Nina. His mom died amidst their blame games. Susan silently left. Betty, unable to marry well due to her scars, married a butcher from a nearby village and cut all ties. Going at this rate, this marriage is doomed. The neighbor sighed while talking to me. Heard he got diagnosed with cancer recently. I smiled at the neighbor and said, "Who knows?" Finished with Grandma's funeral, I was ready to leave when Gary suddenly blocked my way. His hair was gray, and he looked much older, though his eyes were filled with excitement. "Wendy, you've reincarnated, right? I was wrong in our past life. Let's do it right this time. That woman Nina is nothing compared to you with her greed for money." The bodyguard beside me stopped Gary, and I covered my nose in disdain. "Where's this lunatic coming from? Smells terrible. Stay away from me." Gary froze, that remark being his last to me in this life. For 40 years, whenever he got close, he'd sniff the stench of a country villager and dismiss me. But it wasn't from me, it was the rot of his own soul. Ignoring Gary's shouting, I thought it was perfect timing for him to reincarnate. Before he dies of illness, let him truly embrace the end he deserves. The car started, the roadside forsythia blooming brightly, and my spring is just beginning.